The next hour or so, we'll have two distinct parts. I'll give the program chair report, and then we'll hand it off to your outgoing SIG plan chair, who will run the rest of the show. So here we are. I think I've organized things in a fairly conventional fashion. I'll first mostly talk about the process that led to the program and the research papers today with a little bit of data thrown in. Then I'll get to some juicy data I was able to put together in the last few days with a little bit of commentary. And then I'll have a little bit more commentary with some thank yous, and we'll call it a day. So back in mid-November, we had a submission deadline. I woke myself up at 3 in the morning on the West Coast just to make sure everything was going fine. It all went fine. You all are very last-minute people, even more than I thought. Submissions were anonymous, which is better known as double-blind. Conflicts of interest were precisely defined. Every submitting author indicated conflicts of interest. I actually did a reasonable double check of all those to make sure there were neither false positives nor false negatives. That process is of course imperfect. I can only check so many things, but seemed to go fine. And then conflicts are handled sort of very, very strictly. Literally, once reviewer A is listed as a conflict for paper B, reviewer A does not see paper B in the system from beginning to end. So it's sort of nice and simple. Okay? This is how I kind of look at the reviewing team, right? This is PC chair engineering, if you will. You have a program committee that can produce about 700 reviews. You have an external program committee that can produce another 200 reviews and can make the decisions on the PC papers. So essentially, every PC member is viewed as a conflict for every paper that has a PC author. You have a larger external review committee that provides complementary expertise and another couple hundred reviews. And then you find throughout the process a couple dozen times that the review process would benefit from finding a particular kind of expertise that isn't provided by any of these 100+ people. And in some sense, this just tells you that this is a large operation that takes a substantial amount of time from our community, and we as a group, and I completely agree, have decided that it's totally worth it. I thought I'd go a little deep on what should probably be called review preferences, but for decades has been called bidding for papers, as though I'm an auctioneer or something. Like at least PLDI 2 years ago, and maybe some other offerings of conference over the years, I had bids have two parts: a number, where a larger number meant you more wanted the paper, and a letter, which was your best guess as to your expertise level on the paper. And I highly recommend this and think it led to better review assignments. The number and the letter are usually correlated. People generally like to review things they're more experts on, but the lack of correlation when it exists is extremely valuable. Sometimes I need an expert even on a topic that someone's tired of reviewing papers on, but they're happy to do it as needed. And conversely, sometimes you have an emerging area that someone's really interested in, but could not properly claim to be an expert. And so it's really extremely helpful to have both of these. I will say that having reviewers enter their preferences is in some sense the least scalable part of the system. Right? If you have 100+ reviewers and 250+ submissions, you're asking for 25,000 review preferences. Of course, there's a default, but nonetheless, it's sort of inherently non-scalable. So then we do review assignments. That's one of the biggest jobs I do after putting the committees together. Reviews were done in 2 rounds. In the first round, every submitted paper received 3 or 4 reviews. And my goal in the assignment was to make sure each paper got at least 1 expert review, as well as trying not to give papers to reviewers who really didn't want those papers. It's a mix of automated assignment, right? The hot crap software that we use can take even those hybrid bids into account and try to do a good job. Then I spent probably a dozen hours over a couple days doing what I refer to here as ad hoc hill climbing, to try to basically on a per paper basis, as well as sometimes on a per PC member basis, create something a little more rational, subject to load balancing and all these sort of things. But in fact, one of the huge benefits of having a second round where additional reviews are assigned is that the round 1 review assignment doesn't have to be quite as good, right? You want to be as good as possible, but you know you have round 2 coming. In round 2, I gave 1 or 2 additional reviews to not all papers. That's part of the load balancing and scale mechanism and the reason to have 2 reviews. But sort of when in doubt, I did, and over 2/3 of papers did receive round 2 reviews. I will add that which reviews are in which round is opaque to submitters, and that's a discussion we can have certainly from where I sit. It was there's no perfect choice. I feel it was the better choice. And when you're assigning only 1 or 2 reviews per paper, it can actually be done manually over a couple days. If you ask me to describe my algorithm, I would say greedy with backtracking. Decisions, so after round 2 review, somewhat after round 1, but certainly after round 2, there was extensive online discussion for essentially every paper. Then there was a 2-day PC meeting in Seattle in early February. I'll have the data later on how many papers we discussed and all that. The one procedural thing that I learned from Kathleen Fisher many years ago is of the papers you're going to discuss them in a pseudo-random order, essentially random with some clustering in ways that are convenient. I think that leads to a much healthier meeting and a much healthier level of discussion. I highly recommend it. And we had no target acceptance rate. PC papers are decided by the external program committee, which does not meet in the same physical location. We had a 3-hour conference call completely independent of the physical PC meeting. And per SIGPlan and PLDI policy, the external program committee was tasked with deciding whether a PC authored paper was clearly within the acceptance envelope. And I did not try to come up with a more technically precise definition than that. That's the role of judgment and subjective evaluation of the people on that committee. We did maintain double blind throughout the process. So for papers that were not accepted to the conference, authors were never revealed to the reviewers or to the committee. There was one case at the PC meeting where in the course of the discussion, the relation to previous work seemed to hinge on would they know about it, was there overlap, et cetera. The group decided it was reasonable for me to answer that question. I said, yes, there's significant overlap to this piece of prior work. The paper was then accepted, if I recall correctly. This is sort of the way the system is supposed to work. All acceptances were, in fact, conditional. So every accepted paper to PLDI was assigned a shepherd, and we told authors that, in fact, your acceptance is a conditional acceptance. The discussion at the PC meeting was really focused oftentimes by, are there mandatory changes, things that the shepherd needs to insist on, versus changes that we highly recommend, but the acceptance isn't conditioned on them. I think that distinction is of value to everyone. The process should be lightweight. The assumption is that in almost all cases, papers will become accepted. And in fact, this year, every conditionally accepted paper was accepted. And I can tell you from where I sit, there were just no issues. Perhaps I got lucky, but the ensuing changes in shepherding process just was quite straightforward. Okay. So with that, let me show you some numbers. People like numbers. I like numbers. I like arithmetic. So we got 262 submissions. There were 4 I did not send out to reviewers because they were clearly incomplete or out of scope. I was entirely confident in that. This is kind of a normal thing. We had 55 acceptances. If you take 55 and divide by 262, you get a number I'm not going to write down for you. I'm somewhat militant on this point. You can do the math. I'm not hiding anything from you. I just think it's unclear to me what exactly you're measuring. Any 2 numbers can be divided to produce a percentage. I think anything you try to conclude from that is making additional assumptions about the distribution of quality of submissions this year, previous years, over time, et cetera. And I don't think that those assumptions have been validated or necessarily could be validated. So there are the numbers. You can do the math. I will say that we are well within historic norms. This is the highest acceptance rate in several years, but quite similar to sort of the average over 15 years or so. So there's nothing outlandish here. I'm not hiding anything from you. This is my one axe to grind, and I've now ground it. Okay. Submissions were down. I am the first PC chair in a decade not to stand here and tell you that we had an all-time high record number of submissions to PLDI. We did not. We were down by a little over 15%. We are back to the numbers we saw 5 or 6 years ago. This does not bother me because I don't think that we had any decrease in the number of very high quality submissions. In fact, we had more acceptances this year than last year. I was at last year's PC meeting. I don't think that the bar was in any sort of different place. It certainly led to more reasonable reviewing loads. From where I sit, I felt we were perhaps provisioned for 320 submissions and we got 260. If you're a PC chair, that's a fantastic place to be. You or I could probably come up with 10 different theories on why we saw this drop. I don't have evidence for any of them, so I feel like in this report, in this setting, I shouldn't offer any theories I have zero evidence for. Okay? Bottom line is I think PLDI seems healthy, but we should all as a community be aware of this surprising fact after literally a decade plus of constant growth. Some numbers through the process. I've already told you the 262 and then 4 off of that. 179 papers received round 2 reviews. 92 were discussed at the PC meeting. Almost exactly half of those were accepted. Remember, PC authored papers were decided separately. There were 8 of those accepted, which happens to be, it's just coincidence, the exact same as last year. Every PC chair chooses something to sort of geek out mostly for the fun of it. So here's what I did, kind of acceptance by number of expert reviews sort of thing. So of the 258 papers that received reviews, 238 had a reviewer who indicated I have published a paper in this area. So that's all but 20. And of course, since that's almost all of them, that's almost all of your acceptances. Of the 20 remaining, that's where your other 3 acceptances come, right? That's a slightly lower acceptance rate, but it's actually within 1 or 2. It's, I think it's within a random walk, if you will. In most of those cases, based on bidding, we expected someone to be an X, right? And then they finish their review and say, it was a little different topic than I expected. And in all cases, there was online discussion where I said, I'm happy to go find someone. Do you think we need to find someone? And the group would reach consensus of, no, we understand what's going on here. We think we can reach the right conclusion as we are. And then for fun, I looked it up on the flight here a couple days ago. There were 6 papers that got all expert reviews, and 0 of them were accepted. So feel free to go have a beer and say, see, you don't want to attract too many experts. But I will point out that within rounding, you would have expected 1 out of 6. So we're not so far off. I think this is the law of small numbers, if you will. Okay. So the last thing I'll geek out on is sort of paper topics. So when people submitted papers, they chose from a list of 70 or so topics. Where did this list come from? I evolved it from the year before. I looked at it, spent time, last September or so, made about a dozen edits. For example, there used to be a topic verification, and now there's verification automatic, verification interactive, and verification other. I also went ahead and then shopped that to the full PC, EPC, ERC, got a handful of additional suggestions, which I was happy to incorporate. And this was primarily used to help people with their review assignments, and in some cases, review preferences, and in some cases with assignments. So then using it months later to try to communicate, something about the PLDI community is questionable, but at least entertaining and perhaps useful. So I enjoyed doing it, just like previous PC chairs. So you're not supposed to read this graph. This is supposed to show you the full distribution, right? X-axis is about 70 different topics. Y-axis is the number of submissions that picked that topic, and then the blue number is the number accepted. There's no limit, high or low, on how many topics are selected by a submitter, right? So you have many more here than you have papers submitted. And then I'm going to break this sort of into thirds, moving from left to right on the next 3 slides. This is just your overview that says, yeah, there's a heavy tail from a high of 54 or something for language implementation to a low of 1 for real-time systems. Just how it happens. Okay? So this is perhaps the most interesting one. Now I have on the x-axis only those topics for which at least 17 submitted papers claim to be on that topic. And a lot of usual suspects here: compiler optimization, software engineering, performance analysis, and so on. The number 17 was chosen carefully by me yesterday when I was putting together this slide. It happens to be the lowest number I can go down to while still claiming that every one of these topics had at least 3 acceptances. So, certainly among the popular topics, I can, you get different acceptance rates if you divide blue by gray, but you get at least 3 acceptances for all these things. And I guess the most acceptances, 12 there, is for static analysis. Okay? If you then go to the middle section, you start getting a lot more noisy stuff because the number of submitted papers is now between 8 and 16, and you get some zeros, and you get some higher numbers. Like it turns out computer architecture had about a 50% acceptance rate for whatever reason this year in PLDI. We have some great papers that touch on the hardware that is running all the software that people are writing. Okay? And then it keeps going, and I'm not sure that this last third shows very much, but I had no intention of hiding it from you. So there you go, choose your own narrative. There are an infinite number of theories consistent with any finite amount of data. That's actually a fairly important result from philosophy. Many of your theories won't hold if you adjust these numbers by one standard deviation, so make sure to take that into account. And again, this is entirely a post hoc analysis. The thing I like to emphasize is nothing in this data drove any stage of the process, right? It's all computed after the fact and then shared with you so that we can work together to decide if it tells us something important or not. Okay? So with that, let me move on to some reflections, but I'll first start with thank yous. So there he is in the middle. I definitely want to thank Jeff, our general chair, and make sure he gets a round of applause from everyone. It's a really big job. It's actually a longer job than program chair. It's a more diffuse job, and he's just sort of taken it and run with it. And at least 1/3 of the way in, I think we're having a really good conversation. Although it's more like halfway in because he had to handle all the workshops and tutorials as well. Okay. So I've got 2 slides to fit the whole program committee on. But if anyone from the program committee is here, why don't you stand up so that we can find you and clap for you? I know there's probably a bunch of you in the room. Just right, review 20 papers, fly to Seattle for a 2-day meeting, et cetera. I mean, this is a lot of work, and it's volunteer work, and it's impressive. The external program committee, I think I saw at least 2 or 3. Anyone hanging out? No? Yep, there's Millen in the back already standing up. And then our ERC of about 50 people, right, all doing 5 or 6 or 7 reviews, hugely important to the process. Part of all the online discussions, and really an important sort of piece of this giant aircraft carrier that is PLDI on an annual basis. And there should be a few of those. So can ERC members stand up and be thanked? Awesome. So I think we can, go post applause for the rest, but I want to point out it's not just people who submitted reviews. Anyone who submitted a paper, even if it wasn't accepted, my deepest apologies. You put person months into it, and you submitted to PLDI, and that's a big deal. There's the rest of the organizing committee, which I know Jeff thanked this morning, and will thank again. All the student volunteers, the attendees. I sort of sit here in awe, right? Like, I'm the program chair. I had a set of tasks to do. I did them, but it's an amazing operation to produce a program with 55 research papers and 2 days of workshop and tutorials and three keynotes and all the rest of it. And I think it's an important thing. I think the computer science and SIGPlan and PLDI conference system should be sort of treasured, and other communities should be jealous of it. And it's not because of me. It's because of everyone in this room and everyone in the hallway. OK, so a few more reflections before I finish up. I only have a couple more slides. More of you in this room will someday be PC chair than you think at the moment. So here's my advice. You can find this later. You almost cannot put too much time into committee selection. It's worth the time and effort. If your goal as program chair is to exert influence over having high quality and high expertise reviews for as many submissions as possible, this is your primary point of leverage. Everything you do after that is sort of at least a couple bits over. Okay. I very much tried to emphasize courteous and constructive reviews, both for things the authors would see and even between reviewers and online discussion. There is literally no downside to this. I cannot think of a downside to this, and I can think of lots of upsides. So it's something I personally chose to emphasize. And then emphasize accepting papers that are imperfect, because if you only accept perfect papers, you will not accept any papers. But this is PLDI, and we have no intention or desire to accept papers that have scientific flaws that need to be corrected before being published as academic papers. And that's how the way I think every conference should be. So preparing this presentation was my chance to sort of take a step back and say, like, how did I approach this, right? And I really think that I've mostly been sort of a cautious caretaker for a very healthy community. The job was not as difficult as I might have imagined, and that's because I think the community is in such a healthy place, and recruiting a great committee takes some time and effort, but you can be successful because there are people that are eager to be part of a successful PLDI. And if you enjoy the conference and learn something, and there's a good program, sort of, declare success and hand it off to your successor, as we will tomorrow morning at the welcome. So last bit here, sort of point of personal privilege just for a minute. It's literally, PLDI 98 was my first conference, so right about 20 years ago. I remember the conference extremely well, so I have some kindred spirit for if this is your first PLDI. And I've attended a bunch of times and sort of seen PLDI grow and mature and evolve and get bigger and change its format and change its committee system and go double blind and all those things. And watching that maturation process and being part of it is actually pretty neat. I was thinking of a different long road, though. I did the math. Jeff invited me to be PLDI program chair exactly 756 days ago. So that's a little over 2 years, but I decided to look at it this way. I went and found a photograph of my kids that I took that week. And then I went and found a picture that I took last week. So that's at least my own personal benchmark. What happens from the time you agree to be program chair to the time you stand up here and give this report? Thanks. So I am open for a couple questions. I don't want to take too much time away from SIGPlan. It's okay if there are no questions. There's no session chair who's forced to come up with one. Okay, thank you.